Everyone is constantly talking about role queue in Marvel Rivals, and people are legitimately asking for it again and again. But what exactly is role queue? Why is it so controversial? And why do I think that we shouldn't have it at all, even though there are tens and maybe even hundreds of thousands of people asking for it? Now, real quick, before we begin, I want to thank each and every one of you for being here. We are almost at 100,000 subscribers, and I am blown away by the support. Thank you, and let's get back into it. Now, the Marvel Rivals launch was good. Hell, it was even great. With all the new heroes, tons of content, people were having a lot of fun, but the biggest complaint by far was the crazy quad or maybe even 6 DPS compositions that people were consistently getting. It created some really unfun games that felt unwinnable, or it put you in a situation where you couldn't play what you wanted to play because you knew if you did just lock that DPS, you were just gonna lose. And there's a lot of players that were really stubborn. They would lock DPS, basically do nothing, go like, I don't know, 4 and 20 and still not swap off. And that's a very frustrating experience. And a role queue system would do this. It would make it so that you would queue for a role, or maybe all the roles potentially, but you would get placed in one of the roles at the start of the game, and you could only play characters in that role. So if you queued tank, you would only play tank. If you queued DPS, you could only play DPS. And if you queued flex, you could get put into tank, DPS, or support at the start of the game, but then you could only play those roles. Now, ideally in ranked, you would have a separate rank for every single role, and then this would allow every single player to play only what they want. And this means that you would always have a balanced composition, a balanced role, right? Every team would have 2 tanks, every team would have 2 supports, and this allows some amount of consistency in your games. This makes it so that things aren't crazy and wild, and also on the dev end, it can be easier to balance because you don't have to worry about all the possible combinations of characters. You just have to worry about what 2 tanks look like on a team, and not 3, or 2 supports on a team and not 3, because there could be some broken interactions when you combine multiple characters and you kind of create an easier playground or an easier sandbox for you to develop in. Now, I'm trying to steel man the argument of role queue because I understand its merits, and I actually think that there are some really strong arguments for a role queue system. And you might think that it's a shoo-in, but I believe there are some huge problems that come with role queue, and I know of these because I went through the same thing in my 8 years of playing through Overwatch. Here are some of the many problems that role queue can create at the same time that it solves other ones. There's less creative composition, so you're always going to have 2-2-2. This means that you can't have like a 1-3-2 split, or even a 3-3 composition, or a 1-2-3 split. Like, all of these different splits are really interesting and creative in my opinion. I really like the idea of being able to trial things and not just think, oh, 2-2-2 is definitely the best way to play the game, because oftentimes it's not. Oftentimes there's more creative things that you can do, and I like it, especially with all these synergies and characters that kind of overlap with other roles, to give us that creative flexibility. So it's not like, oh, we need to make DPS that are straight up DPS. It can be like, hey, we can create characters that are like DPS support hybrids and tank support hybrids and DPS tank hybrids, and you can do whatever you want to do. That's extra bits of creativity. Another thing that people don't really feel until they can't do it is the freedom of swapping. You can't swap when you need to do X. Like, as an example, let's say that you're someone that can play several great characters. You could play Magneto, you could play Hela, and you can freaking play like Mantis, right? And then there's an Iron Man raining on your team, killing your team over and over again, and you have like a Spider-Man DPS and maybe like a Squirrel Girl, and for whatever reason, their Iron Man is uncontested. He's unstoppable. He's so freaking good and just destroying you. And as Magneto, you're sitting there and you're like, hey, I can't do anything about that. But you know what? I'm just going to let my Venom solo tank, and I'm going to go freaking play Hela, and I'm going to destroy that guy. And you do, and you win that game. And that's the freedom of swapping. You can play what you think you need. You can play what you want to do in any given moment. You can try something and it doesn't work. This level of freedom is amazing, and it really corresponds directly with like Marvel Rivals, the hero fantasy. Play what you want to play, do what you want to do. And in addition to that, when you go into a role lock system, you're no longer going to be rewarded for that flexibility. It doesn't matter that you can play a whole bunch of different characters from a whole bunch of different roles. You will not see that reflected in your rank. You are only going to be judged how you play the characters in each individual role. The other thing that role lock can create is less RNG, less randomness. And you might be like, Mills, why is randomness a good thing? Why is less randomness a bad thing? But what can really happen is that it makes games feel very samey very quickly. Metas will get solved much more rapidly in a system like this. And what it creates is metas that get enforced very quickly. Players start playing only the really dominant compositions very fast. And like right now in Overwatch 2, people at the high ranks basically always play the meta. They always play the meta compositions. You run into them all the time. The strong characters. There are going to be some outliers, but people really try to play meta, especially the meta tanks get played a freaking lot, and then the community gets mad, and then they have to get changed, and it happens all the time. Things get solved very quickly. But back in Overwatch 1, when there wasn't a role lock system, even during Ghost, which was a super strong 3 tank, 3 DPS composition, we almost never saw that in ranked. It was very rare that people would ever play that in ranked, and it allowed you more chaos, more flexibility, less solved metas, and people just kind of got to do what they wanted to do a lot more, which I think increased your enjoyment of the game, even if it can decrease the competitive aspect of the game. So it's gonna be an opinion-based thing here, but I think especially now in these early times, I am for more RNG. I am for more fun instead of creating a more hyper-solved competitive game right now. Now, I think all these problems can be matters of opinion. You could agree with me or not, but the one thing that everyone has to concede is that the biggest problem that comes from role queue is definitely queue times. And before we get to exactly why that's such a big problem, I want you to understand that Overwatch was forced to do role queue. They did not plan to do role queue. A problem like GOATS, which was a triple tank, triple support composition, a problem that they themselves created with balance, they couldn't fix. They tried to fix and balance it many, many times, and because of slow development and many more problems that popped up, they eventually had to put in a role queue system to nerf it from competitive play. But their original vision was never to go into a role queue system because of this problem, the queue time problem, and they knew it was going to be a major one. I want to ask you a simple question. How long would you wait to play a game of Marvel Rivals? Well, towards the latter seasons of Overwatch 1, I waited over 15 minutes on average, sometimes even over 25 to get a game on DPS. Now, granted, I was in a higher rank, but still, even lower ranked players still waited far longer than they should, over 5, 6, 7 minutes at times. And one of my favorite features right now with Rivals is that we are getting games very quickly. No one is waiting longer than like 10 seconds for a game the majority of the time, and that's awesome. You get to queue up into a game very fast, and this would persist. Even if the game has low pop, high pop, doesn't matter. We would have fast queues if we don't have a role queue. And I'm going to say that the queue type problem would be a problem immediately and would only get worse over time. And I know this for the exact reason that everyone is complaining right now, and it's really the root of the problem. There are not enough tanks and supports for people to play, and that makes the roles less popular. That means less people would queue for those roles, and that means that if you wanted to play DPS and to an extent even support, you would wait a much longer time than if you wanted to play tank. Tanks would get queues all the freaking time because there's not enough of them to go around. So we know based on the problems that we're experiencing right now that this would indeed be a problem immediately if we implemented role queue. Now, Mills, are you saying there's no solution to this problem and we should just deal with this? Absolutely not. I think that there are solutions that we should try far before we ever consider something like role queue. Like for supports, we actually do get more support on average than we see tanks, and I wanted to ask you the question, if we had 5 more fantastic supports in Marvel Rivals, do you think that we would run into any problems with finding a support in a game? I actually don't think we would have a problem at all with 5 more insane supports. So if it's a matter of numbers, let's allow them to ramp up the numbers. Now, tanking, on the other hand, I think is intrinsically going to be the least popular role. But this even furthers the idea that you need more in that role so that you don't run into these problems. And having so few characters in the tanking role compounds that intrinsic problem even further. So do I think it's a misstep to not release more tanks at launch and more supports to a lesser extent? 100% they should have. But at the end of the day, we need to give Marvel Rivals some time and some grace here because they've literally done everything else so well. They've done so much good about the launch of the game that asking for more seems like we're being greedy. And I understand that we need more supports and more tanks really fast, but I know that they are working on it. They understand these problems and they can fix these problems, or at least try to fix these problems by creating some insanely fun and cool tanks, and we know they can make some amazing characters. And if you look at the Marvel Universe, there are just so many characters that could be absolute bangers as tanks, and I want to see them as tanks, and I would be super excited to play them. But what this really means is maybe one day we will need role queue. But for today, let's give Rivals time to figure it out. We do not need to hyper speed up the timeline when Overwatch and Blizzard was given much more time to solve their own problems. I really want people to let this game be free for just a bit longer before we try to solve everything, try to speed up the timeline, and allow the developers to try to cook a little bit more, create more fun characters before we try to solve everything, because we've been at the end of that road and now we're all here instead of over there. So I really hope that this video changed your mind about role queue, but if it didn't, I want you to give me your best argument in the comments down below, because I read every single comment and I will honestly consider every single argument given to me. This is just my opinion and I want to hear yours, but also let me know what characters you want to see as tanks and supports down below. What is your favorite Marvel character that is not quite in the game that would be an amazing tank and support? Let me know. But anyways, thank you so much for hearing me out. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.